from now.
Hey, this is David Hayter. You may know me as the screenwriter of films like X-Men, X-Men 2, and Watchmen, but you probably know me best as the voice of Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. And you're listening to Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. Kept you waiting, huh?
The Kasanova Podcast, the #1 podcast in Hawaii, is brought to you by these contributors on Patreon. If you'd like to see more content like this more often, as well as more podcast reviews, impressions, early access releases, live streams, and original content, then consider becoming a patron today. All right, and welcome everyone to another phenomenal episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I'm coming at you with an exceptionally amazing episode. And in today's episode, I've got the honor and privilege of interviewing the one, the only, Aiea Pathammavong. He's a web designer for Square-Enix and is also the CEO and founder of Chroma Works. Now, Chroma Works is your one-stop shop for modified retro video game consoles. You know, they thrive to provide the highest quality service and products for video games purists who prefers original hardware with modern features, such as USB Type-C interfaces, LED backlights, and so much more. In this interview, we're going to cover a lot of things, from his career and how he got into the video games industry, his time at Square-Enix and being in the credits, phenomenal franchises from Kingdom Hearts to Final Fantasy, and also his time as an entrepreneur for his company Chroma Works and the journey that comes with running your own business and brand. So if you're ready to do it, I'm ready to do it. Let's go ahead and welcome Aiea onto the show. All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova. I have the true honor and privilege of having Aiea on the show, and Aiea is not only someone who works for Square-Enix, he's also the founder and I want to say CEO as well, of Chroma Works. So, man, Aiea, go ahead and introduce yourself, man. Plug social media outlets, anything you're working on, let people know, and I'm also going to leave it in the description of this podcast.
Sure thing. Aloha and hello, everybody. My name is Aiea Pathammavong. As Mekel had just said, I am currently the web designer over at Square-Enix America. We're located here in Los Angeles, and I've been with Square-Enix going on 4 years now. It's kind of surreal to think when I was just first starting, that I was even in a privileged circumstance to even work for a company that I've admired for so long. And it feels like no time has even gone, but here we are 4 years strong, and doesn't feel like it's gonna stop. I'm definitely happy, professionally, and I'm excited about the future of the company. And so that's where I come from professionally. And then also as well on the side, outside of Square-Enix, I also operate, manufacture, market, I wear a lot of hats essentially. For my other company called Chroma Works. And as far as plugging things are concerned, I think the easiest thing to do is visit the Chroma Works official website. it'll have all of the social outlets on there, so you can follow me through that route. And the URL for that is Chroma.works.
Awesome. So yeah, man, go ahead and tell us about yourself, some of your hobbies, things you're interested in, and things you like to do.
Sure. I think just from what I explained, I'm definitely somebody that is passionate about video games in multiple respects, right? Like I grew up playing video games. In particular, I am really fond of playing Japanese role-playing games. And that's where it kind of all started. Obviously, being a fan of that genre, I've played many Final Fantasies, multiple entries in the Persona series. Depending on how old some of you are, I'm also a huge fan of the Lunar series, which one of my favorite RPGs of all time, Eternal Blue, so the second Lunar game. That game changed my life when my cousin was playing it for the first time, and just seeing the beautiful, cinematics and the orchestral score and everything. It was just unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
Yeah.
Of course, later on I discovered that it wasn't introduced on the PlayStation, but it was a port of the Sega Saturn console, which I never owned growing up. But yeah, so I guess like to kind of go through my gaming history a little bit. The first console that I remember ever owning was a Game Boy Pocket. And I think for a lot of people that might be similar in age to the both of us, I think we're both the same age. I'm 31, right? And so, you'd go to school, and I think for our generation, Pokemon was really big, during elementary school. And it was kind of a common thing to see other kids that were in your class either play with Pokemon cards, or they had Game Boys and they were playing Pokemon Red or Blue at the time. And of course, I was fascinated by the Game Boy and asked my parents if I can get one. And my parents ended up giving me the yellow Game Boy Pocket, and it was sort of my companion, during my free time as a kid. Being a little bit shy, I tend to want to be in my own space. And so the Game Boy, in conjunction with having Pokemon, really helped me kill time, and it kind of improved my reading abilities. And I guess like in some ways, it was my first RPG, if you want to, really think about Pokemon as a game. So that's where it all started. And then the first home console I ever had in my own house was the first PlayStation. And I was always going around to, other friends' homes, and, like we would have sleepovers and, all the fun stuff. Like we had our fair share of playing outside, but, spending time inside as well, it's usually devoted to video games. And so my friends growing up, they had, the Sega Genesis, they had the original NES, the Super Nintendo, but I never really had one in my house growing up until my parents got me the original PlayStation. And I remember getting the original Crash Bandicoot for that. And I played that game so much. And I think I had mentioned this when we first met in Honolulu, but the concept of a memory card just wasn't a thing that I was familiar with. Neither were my parents, because, up until that point, at least on, Genesis and Nintendo, you can save directly on the cartridge. Which wasn't the same case for PlayStation discs. So assuming that, it behaved the same way, every time I turned off the console, I would literally start over, and I just figured that's how the game was, right? I wouldn't know any better. And so I got so good at the first Crash Bandicoot that I could legitimately play it in one sitting from the start to the end of the game, just because I had to keep going back from the beginning, and it was like just all muscle memory. And that was great fun. And then I remember going to my friend's birthday party, and he had just rented from Blockbuster, or maybe it was Hollywood Video, one of the two. He had rented Final Fantasy VIII, and I had not been exposed to Japanese role-playing games up until that point. And so I went from Pokemon to Crash Bandicoot, and then you see something like Final Fantasy VIII, and it just totally rocked my world. I'm like, what is this? And I was, at that point, you know, I was getting closer to becoming a teenager, and as one goes through in life, you kind of go through that period of adolescence, and not really knowing it, you know, in the moment, of course, but, you know, VIII, I think for a lot of people, like, it has a lot of those aspects to it where, you know, there's adolescence. It's a little bit more drama based. I think some people kind of compare it to like a Korean drama, right? Just because of how the relationships unfold between all the characters. And it was just gorgeous, you know, with the cutscenes and of course like the iconic music that I literally begged, you know, my mom at the time if she can get it for me. And it was kind of a big deal because that game was on 4 CDs. So I remember putting my marketing hat on as a kid is like, how am I going to convince my mom that, you know, it's worth paying? I don't know, at the time it was maybe like 60 or 80 bucks. Brand new. And so we were in Target and I told her that's the game I want. And it actually is 4 times longer because it's on 4 CDs. So it's like the length of 4 games for, you know, the same price or whatever. And she's like, oh, that'll keep you busy for a while. And that, you know, thankfully was enough to convince her. And then I spent, you know, however long going through Final Fantasy VIII. And it just all kind of snowballed, right? From there. And then you get into like the next generation with PS2. And I had a PS2 and I had a Dreamcast at the time. And there's many, many memorable experiences with that generation. And then, you know, we go into 360 and I'm getting ready to go to college and PS3 and the Wii. And then after I finished college, there was a period of time where I was unemployed. I had just graduated from Full Sail University over in Orlando, Florida. It's like a private college. Some of the viewers might recognize that name because I think their target demographic, it tends to be, you know, people that are interested in entertainment, video games, technology, film, so on and so forth. So I was really happy when I got accepted into that school because I heard about it through, you know, Electronics Gaming Magazine and various game publications. And I graduated in 2009 and I graduated with a bachelor's of digital arts and with the intention of wanting to to become a print designer. And so like my dream at that time was to do spreads and layouts for video game publications. And unfortunately, you know, if you look back at 2009, that was during a time when the economy wasn't in great shape. A lot of companies weren't hiring. And being a kid, you know, that grew up in Florida, a lot of those publications aren't really based in Florida. Like you're either based in like New York or California. And I felt kind of stuck, right? So I went through the next several years after college trying to figure out what's my next move, right? Because obviously print as a medium was dying. Everything is moving more towards web-based stuff. And I spent the next couple of years trying to adapt the skill set that I learned from college and, you know, pivot myself from primarily thinking of inside this box of like, I only want to do print design and eventually, you know, start pivoting towards becoming specialized in designing for web. So once I made that, mental decision, I started trying to build a portfolio for myself. I moved around a little bit out of Florida because a lot of the companies around there, they weren't hiring, or they were actually folding or going out of business. So I moved around a little bit. I lived in Washington, D.C. for some time, Atlanta, going to pretty much anywhere where I had family so that I had a place to stay while I was, applying for jobs. And there was an opportunity that allowed me to do an internship in San Diego. And I think that was like the first breakthrough for me, where I was in the right location, but I'm in a different industry than what I really wanted to do. So I ended up doing an internship with a music company, and I'm eternally grateful for the opportunities that presented me. But ultimately, in my mind, I knew I always wanted to. I still had that passion to somehow get into the video games, and went through a series of jobs, and eventually moved out of San Diego and made my way up to Los Angeles. And one day I was still working at my current job at that point. I saw a job posting for SquareEnix, and I think I had been a web designer, like that was officially my title. It had been probably 4 years since I was primarily doing design for websites. And I was just at that point where I was a little frustrated with the company that I was working for, and decided to, open up LinkedIn and see like what opportunities are out there. And much to my surprise, a lot of the game companies during that time were looking for designers. And the one that stood out to me the most, obviously, was SquareEnix. And I didn't even know they had a US office at the time. So I was a little surprised to see that. I was kind of assuming that, like, oh, that's going to be a position that's in their office in, Japan, because that's where their headquarters are.
Yeah.
Sure enough, they have an office in Los Angeles, and they're looking for a web designer. And I was like, there's no way that, if I were to apply for this position, that I would ever be considered. But I did anyways, right? Because when something like that is open and available, the worst thing that can happen is like they don't reply to you. But the fact that the posting was up, it gives you that opportunity to submit something, right? And if it's worth their while, they'll reach out to you. And so I did exactly that. I applied for the web designer job, thinking that I wasn't going to get a call back or anything like that. And at the very least, I can tell my friends like, oh, I applied at SquareEnix, but, didn't work out, or, maybe some other time. It just wasn't in the cards. And I get a call from the HR office over at SquareEnix, and I was shocked, to be completely honest, just because of the history that I've had with the games, and not expecting anything at all, like, or having relatively no expectations. To receive that first phone call was something that I'll never forget. As cheesy as that sounds, it was like, oh wow, you guys actually took notice of me, of my application and the portfolio that I submitted. And so they wanted to do an interview, like a phone interview. And I was like, okay, absolutely. I'd be more than, like, I'm in a fortunate position. Of course, I want to talk to you guys and see if there's an opportunity here. Finished the first interview, and of course, mentally, I was thinking that I wasn't going to get a follow-up. It's like, I could at least say that I got one interview at SquareEnix. And then I got a follow-up call for the second interview, and then another one after that. And it just got to the point where I'm like, this is like either like a string of fortunate circumstances, or I might actually have a shot at this. Right? I almost felt like I was getting away with something. Like, it's like, are they oblivious? Like, why me? But anyway, so after the final interview, they gave me a call back and they're like, we want to extend this offer to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew at that moment that the course of the rest of, I guess, like my 20s at that point,
Mm-hmm.
it was going to change, for the better. And that like all of the work that I did up until this, it kind of all led up to this point, and that
Mm-hmm.
um, the course of my professional career is going to be changed for the better because of it. And it's been that way every day that I go into the office. Like I feel fortunate, lucky. I get to do what I love for a living in with a company that I admire greatly,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just really fortunate in that I was able to get to this place. And for anybody that is interested in joining, the games industry, I think my piece of advice is just like, don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely opportunities outside of game development that are worth looking into. And in most cases, some people find that, roles outside of the actual development of the game is something that they'd be much happier with
Mm-hmm.
in the first place. So that was the long version.
No, dude,
I felt like I went for a little bit there, but in a
that was
nutshell,
awesome.
that's kind of where it all started and how things are currently right now.
Dude, that's awesome. Like, no, I greatly appreciate you sharing your story with us because, that's something. Uh, it's kind of like when I was talking to the students, at University of Hawaii Maui College yesterday. One of the things that I was telling them was like, the journey into this field, working with, the games industry or the tech industry, like how a lot of us got into it is not a cut and dried, like, hey, we just went to school and boom, we got the job. It's a process, like you and I, we're the same age. And, I when I graduated from college in 2009, I got a degree in communications marketing. And the goal of what I wanted to do was go to work for a print media, to do marketing for my friend Jason Cutinella. He runs Nella Media Group out here in Hawaii, and it's like the biggest print media. And I was thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to graduate and go work for them, and do marketing and promotions. And then social media came around. It was it's already been around, but it was booming at that point around
Mhm.
2009, 2010. And then also we had the economic crash. So like I was telling the students, at that point, having my degree and with the economy and with how social media had just changed things, like I went a long way of just not doing anything with my degree, and I floated to doing various jobs. I did retail, which, in hindsight, I'm grateful that I went through it because now I understand that aspect when I go in a store, don't be a jerk to the to a lot of the people that work in the industries. But at the same time, it's like I was telling the students, like I went through retail, and then being unsatisfied with retail, I decided to try my hand at different things. Like I worked at Microsoft when I moved up to Seattle, Washington, and I got that. I got to work at the game studios just because at the time the girl I was dating her dad happened to work for Microsoft, so I was able to get
Uh,
in and work with them. And then, when I moved away because I got homesick and I wanted to come back to Hawaii, and when I moved back out here, I couldn't really do that, what I was doing at Microsoft here. So I ended up, I floated and got into IT, and I was a senior systems analyst for up until last year. And it was fun, but I didn't get to utilize what I went to school for. And then when I decided, hey, I'm going to take the plunge with content creation, with podcasting, with working with the video games industry, this was the first time I actually got to not only apply things I learned in other positions and, other jobs and whatnot, but I actually got to apply what I went to school for. And so what I was telling the students was, you know, no matter what you do in life, whatever you learn in school, wherever you go, you're always learning, and you're always going to get in a position where you're going to be able to apply something that you've learned. Like that, I write reviews. There was times when I was in college and I was taking second level English or English 102 at Chaminade, and I was like, God, I hate this class. I absolutely hate it. Like the teacher was so strict about punctuation and placement and grammar, and I hated it. But as a games journalist now, it's like that's critical. You have to know
Yeah.
the formatting, not only for that, but for like business email proposals to companies like, hey, I'd like to work with you, or I'd like to get a review code or whatever. And it's like everything for me within the last 10 to 15 years that I've learned or experienced has just come together to apply to what I'm doing now. And it's just the journey is fun. It's truly an amazing journey. So thank you, for what you were sharing with your story and your journey, because I think that's very pivotal. And I really think the younger generation, they need to hear stuff like that from our generation, because it's critical in my opinion.
Right. There was one thing that I had left out during my
Go for it.
earlier.
Go for
But
it.
I did work for GameStop
Me too.
6 or 7 years, and that was sort of the part-time job that I kind of hung on to as I was moving around to different states. So I would just file for a store transfer if I knew I was going to go to DC, or if I knew I was going to go to Atlanta. The moment that I got my first internship out in San Diego, I filed for a store transfer to work at a store out there as well. So that was, looking back on it as a kid in Florida, that was kind of the only Asian in my schools. A lot of the times, I was obviously really shy, and I felt like I couldn't really be open, to my peers and people that were in the same class as me. But having gone through those years working in retail, it kind of forces you to open up a little bit, because if you're not able to be somebody that someone can trust, or that can take your word for whatever it is that you're trying to sell, you're not going to go very far in retail, right? And I was always raised under the belief, like, if you're going to do something, do it the best that you can. And I had spent a lot of time working, and I'm sure because you've worked at GameStop as well, you don't get to spend the majority of your time talking to people that are the same age. You tend to talk to people that are older, that might be parents, or kids that are younger than you, right? So learning how to adapt and start conversations, or anything of the like, that was instrumental in how I present myself today, is having gone through those many years of being put in a position where I kind of had to be a little extroverted. Now sometimes, like, you can't shut me up, like I literally ranted for God knows how long at the start of the podcast,
but we love it. Keep doing that.
I feel re-energized whenever I get to talk to people, and having the opportunity to share my story. It's exciting, and the little piece of working in retail, it obviously contributes to the larger picture, right? Like because I worked in video games retail, it informs a lot of the decisions that I have to make at SquareEnix. I think because I grew up playing Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Tomb Raider, even some of the non-Japanese developed titles, I can objectively look at it from a business perspective, but also, like, at the core, I want to make sure that whatever it is that we're creating for marketing, like, that it'll be a touch point for fans.
Yeah.
And I think I'm in a really unique position where I try to look at it from both ways, because I consider myself still a fan. And a lot of the jobs that I've had leading up to SquareEnix, it's better, like I've been able to formulate a more business mindset so that I can bring, that perspective alongside it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, man. Awesome. No, it's something when you look at the games that we grew up with, from our era. It feels weird to say our era, but it's so totally true, because we were.
We're allowed to say it. It's fine.
It's like when you think about it, like there are things that for us is still surreal to see, that this generation now that just grew up with it, they're like, oh yeah, that's common. Like to see Sonic and Mario on the same platform, and even Crash Bandicoot on a Nintendo platform. For us, like we grew up in a time where, it was the console war. It was Nintendo versus Sega, and that was a legit console war. Like kind of like what I think I said that with Adam. Like there were differences between games being on the two platforms. They were not the same experience. Whereas now it's like, what controller do you like? What type of graphical settings do you want? What frame rate? Like it was different back then, and now it's like, you see kids, they're like, oh, well, more correctly, I see some, people that are Nintendo Switch purists, where they're like, oh, I only want to play it if it's on the Switch, or I only want to play if it's on PlayStation, or only if it's on Xbox. And I'm like, this is not the consoles, Cold War, Civil War. You didn't grow up in that era. Back then, you were diehard Nintendo or Sony or Sega. Like it's not that way now. It's like it's a weird concept to me when I see people now that are quote unquote fanboys of platforms. I'm like, it's not like it was back in the day.
I completely agree. It's kind of heartbreaking when this is kind of going back to the GameStop retail experience, but I think the first moment where that hit me, as far as like, oh, I'm actually talking to like non-gamers, like they don't have a clue. I remember there was what looked like a mother. She came in and he's like, I'm shopping for a birthday gift for one of my son's friends, and I know he's a big fan of Mario. He's like, oh great, like we have multiple Mario titles in stock right now. Here's the latest one. And I think at that time it was New Super Mario Brothers on Wii. I remember it having I think it was a red case.
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah.
So that's the one that I recommended to her, and she's like, "Oh, great!" She's like looking at the back of the box, and she's like, "This is exactly what I need. Can I please have it on Xbox?" And like my spirit, my heart was like, "Oh, this is where we're starting." Okay, so then trying to best explain to someone who has not been, following video games as closely as, some of the core audience, and I would consider us part of that core audience. Trying to explain it in a very like simple way to her. Fortunately at that time, ended up, she ended up actually buying a Wii with that game, which was kind of crazy to me, because it's like, oh, this isn't even for like your son. This is for like your son's friend. It's like this woman is like in a fortunate position where she can, purchase a new console just for like this one game for her son's friend. But yeah, it's just like little moments like that where it reminds me that not everybody's on the same level, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, the folks that are younger than us who didn't grow up with Nintendo versus Sega, it's a foreign concept to them, right? Or maybe they think they know what it is, but they didn't like live through it. And I think it ended up being that way for a number of reasons, like whether it was like from a technology standpoint, just because back then, Nintendo couldn't just grab a off the part shelf for that makes up a Nintendo system, right? They kind of had to custom make a lot of these chips, and programming for a Nintendo system was very different from programming with a Sega Genesis, as opposed to today, where we're essentially using PCs in our living rooms.
Yeah.
In like a Sony or a Microsoft dress, or I guess even to an extent the Switch too. But yeah, it's always fascinating to see how the industry has changed, both from a consumer mindset, from a technology perspective, and it's always fun to look back because I think, and this kind of goes into my fascination with a lot of the retro stuff. It's fun to look back because I think it can inform a lot of things for us that is on the horizon, or at least it reminds us that, like, oh, there was a time when, I guess in the case of the Game Boy, if you had this device, it had one purpose, and that was to play Game Boy games. You didn't boot it up, and you're inundated with like, oh, do you want to watch like YouTube? Do you want to watch Netflix? Do you want to like play the game? And I love there's like this beauty and the simplicity of, it's like a single purpose device, and if you bring it with you, you have like one intention and one intention only. I think it's important to kind of look back, so that way when you look forward, you can make different decisions. It kind of gives you a unique perspective on things.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. Like and we're definitely going to dive into Chroma Works and retro gaming, but that's one of the things that I miss about the era that we grew up in, was, like you said, like not being inundated with, do you want this to be a multimedia device, or I just want to play a game. Like, I hate it now that when you buy games on a disc, it's pretty much DRM. So it's like, you can't, like it'll download the most of the data off the disc onto the console, and then require the disc to play it. Then there's all the updates, and sometimes you can't play a game until it updates fully. And it's like, I miss the days where I can just pop the cartridge into either my Game Boy or 64 or my Super Nintendo or whatever, and I can just even the old, the PlayStation 2 era, where you can just put them in and play them. I miss that simplicity, and I like that. In some cases, like with the Switch, that was kind of the general idea with it, and a lot of people bashed it for that. They're like, no, I wanted to have Netflix, I wanted to have YouTube, I wanted to have this, and I'm over here like, let's just make a gaming console. Let's just have something just for game. I miss that time. I'm sorry. This is my old man, get off my lawn type of rant.
It's okay. We share a lot of the same perspectives, so I can totally sympathize.
So with let's talk about Chroma Works. Like, you're the founder of it. Would you mind telling us about your company and like what inspired you to create it, like how that process came about?
Sure. I guess like the very beginnings of it was maybe a year and a half ago, years, something like that. And I think one of the fortunate things that I came to discover when I was first starting to date my current significant other. Her name is Lisa, by the way. Shout out to Lisa. She totally
hey.
Yeah, so when I started dating Lisa, one of the cool things is that, you're in like the early stages of a relationship and you're trying to find some common ground. And being somebody that is Japanese, that had grown up in a Japanese household and frequently goes to Japan, video games is very much a part of their culture there for many people. I think a lot more so than, the United States. It's just something that's ingrained in the culture, whether you like it or not. You're gonna walk down the street and there's just gonna be like something video game related, whether it be like merchandise, product, or like advertisements. So she obviously grew up playing a lot of the same games as I did, and we were on the topic of Pokemon. And I think at that time, Pokemon Go was just coming out on mobile devices. And we really wanted to get into it together because we had a history with Pokemon, and that was like the first time that we were going to be like playing Pokemon together, right? So it was like an exciting thing, and we started playing it, and she was really into it. But I think for me, I understand like now that I've played it for some time, that game is going after a demographic that isn't like the core Pokemon fan.
Yeah.
And a lot of the features and things that made Pokemon memorable for me, I wasn't getting that fix from Pokemon Go. And so we were talking about it, and I was like, like I miss having choice in, the battles, of being able to like select what attacks I want to do. I miss going through this both linear and also open structure of going through the different towns and training up your Pokemon. And even like the trading aspect, right? And I think at that time, Pokemon Go didn't even have the trading feature quite yet. So it felt really empty to me. And it's like, I don't really feel like I'm accomplishing anything. At most, like it's cool to see, the first generation Pokemon in like full 3D and the way that they have them displayed in the game. But it wasn't really doing it for me. And so then we continued talking, and I told her, like, growing up, I played Pokemon Red, and that was like the thing that I spent the most time on. And then I played Pokemon Yellow, and that was really the last mainline Pokemon game that I played. And I played Pokemon Snap on Nintendo 64, which I love, and I wish that they would bring that back in some form.
They definitely should.
Yeah. And then I played Pokemon Pinball on Game Boy, and so I never made the leap from the first generation to Generation 2. So I never played Pokemon Silver, Pokemon Gold, Pokemon Crystal, and then so on and so forth. And when Lisa heard that, she's like, "You should play Generation 2. That's my favorite generation of Pokemon," because I really felt like at that point when that came out, it was like, oh, Pokemon's like this franchise that's going to stick around, because there's a lot of, now that I've played through Pokemon Silver and Crystal, that game holds up really well even today. And there's a lot of things that they introduced during that generation of Pokemon that I think forever changed, the course of that franchise. And it's just a juggernaut at this point. Pokemon, when I look at Pokemon, it's like one of those franchises that sort of ascended beyond just being like a video game property. It's like considered pop culture, at this point. It's like much bigger than when it first started. So we ended up deciding, wouldn't it be fun if we both got Game Boys and started playing Generation 2? And I was living in downtown Los Angeles at the time, and there was a store that was just opening up, like literally not even 2 blocks away from my apartment. And it was this import shop. And I was there the opening day and got to talk to the owner a little bit. And we ended up getting Game Boy Colors, both Lisa and I. And then she got Pokemon Gold, I got Pokemon Silver. And it was kind of off to the races. And what really stood out to me was, like I said earlier, there was a beauty in the simplicity of something like the Game Boy. And there was definitely a lot of games on the original and on Game Boy Color that I actually never got a chance to play. And getting to experience, Pokemon Silver for the first time many, many years after its original release Um, I felt like playing it on an original launch Game Boy Color, the game almost felt like it needed a better way to present itself, right? And what I mean by that is when you try to play on an OG Game Boy Color, there's just a lot of things and decisions that Nintendo made at the time to try to hit a certain price point, using whatever tech was going to allow them to hit that price point. And so what you ended up with was a device that took AA batteries, which was commonplace at the time. And then you had the Game Boy was notorious for having screens that weren't backlit, or which was fine because I think the majority of us we played outside during recess when we were kids. But the moment you got home, or the moment you wanted to play when the sun went down, you kind of had to use your creativity a little bit to try to figure out how to play this thing when you're supposed to be sleeping at night.
We got stories, people.
Yeah, so I definitely felt that, and I was like, man, wouldn't it be great if there was a way that I can play Pokemon Silver on original hardware with potentially a backlit screen? And that led me down this rabbit hole on Reddit, and I was seeing these Game Boys that people were modding. And that was really interesting to me, where there was still this demographic that still wants to play these games on like a form factor that they have nostalgia for, with these new features, right? And so I kind of started getting curious, and at that point I had no experience with soldering. I had no experience with dealing with electrical circuitry, outside of building a gaming PC when I was in high school, but that's pretty much plug and play for the most part. This is something that was like completely different that I had never tried before. And it was fun. It was like the start of discovering like this new passion, this new hobby that I discovered. It was like, wow, like I never knew that there was something like this. And it just got to a point where I finally built something that I was really proud of. And when I showed Lisa, there was like my first modded Game Boy. It's like, oh my God, I want you to build me one. And so seeing, I think, the reception of people when they see something that they're so familiar with, but it's like updated, that was also another point that fascinated me. And it just snowballed after that, where there was like different components that were being introduced. There's whole companies out there that are making components for retro consoles, and so the space is even like where we're at today. I think the majority of the components that I use in the Game Boys that I build, they didn't exist even a year and a half ago. So the space is rapidly, there's rapid iteration on newer screens and slimmer batteries that have like higher capacities for charge. It's really fascinating, and I know I've said that a lot, so I'll try to use it in turn.
No, dude, it's fine.
Yeah. So that's kind of where the genesis of my, that's where it started. Was essentially a hobby, and it was to cater to my own personal desire to revisit these classic games on like the original form factor. And I'm sure there's definitely folks out there that would literally just say, well, why don't you play those games like on a Game Boy Advance SP or something, right? Because that came with a backlit screen and that had a rechargeable battery feature to it as well. I just, when it comes down to it, I never had a Game Boy SP, and so I never had the chance to have a nostalgia for it, and so it was something deeply personal in that, like, I wanted to go back and feel like a kid again. And it seemed like a lot of people that are at least on the Game Boy subreddit there's definitely a fair share of folks that feel that same way too.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of which it started becoming a business for me, it a couple of things ran through my mind where it would be great if I could find like a side job. And my first assumption was like, oh, I'll just do freelance design work because that's kind of what I've been doing,
Mm-hmm.
alongside my main jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept finding myself thinking like, man, wouldn't it be interesting if I, entered this space where I sold these Gameboys that I'm building.
Mm-hmm.
And I started researching, and of course, there's other people that have been doing it, selling modded Gameboys through online orders.
Mm-hmm.
Whether their storefront was going to be on Etsy or eBay, or some people even just post on Instagram. It's like, this is the Game Boy that I have for sale. If you're interested, DM me. So it's very grassroots as far as like the people that were trying to do it as a business, whether it be like a side business or their primary business.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said earlier, I think in life you kind of go through these different experiences that can lead to something greater, right? So when I made the decision to start Chroma Works, I didn't want to brand it in a way where it was going to be pigeonholed into like, oh, this is the Game Boy company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted the name to exemplify this philosophy of like, whatever product that we're going to offer through Chroma Works, I want it to be like products that bring color into your life. I think that was like the motif that I ran with, and it just so happens that like the first product offering was a Game Boy Color, because that's what I knew how to build, and I knew how to do it very well. And so now I just needed to build an audience, and I've had many years of doing marketing for various industries, and I have the retail experience from GameStop, and so it felt like when things were starting to get going, this, and it still is to this day, continues to remind me that it's a culmination of everything that I've learned at this point. And so the nice thing is that I can try something with Chroma Works, like a different marketing tactic or something like that, right? Which I wouldn't normally be able to do at Square-Enix, because there's multiple stakeholders, and there's just a series of approvals that need to happen. A lot of the times, the end result is not what I originally wanted, but it's obviously like the nature of that business. I get a chance to experiment, on my own, because at this point, like I'm still the main point person that does a lot of the business for Chroma Works, but Lisa's definitely helped me out. My best friend Josh helped me as well. So it gives me a platform to, if I'm curious about something, I'm able to do that through Chroma Works. And if it turns out that it's a successful thing, then I can then try to recommend it in my actual professional job. It's like, well, I did this thing and these are the results, and I think it might work for us here, and vice versa, right? Like things that I learned at SquareEnix, it kind of funnels back into Chroma Works. So it's this satisfying cycle of like consistently testing and seeing if things work.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Oh, that's and delving into the realm of entrepreneurship, like I'm actually going to mix these two questions into one, because I think they mesh very well. But what has been your experience like so far, in the sense of being an entrepreneur with Chroma Works, like, and some of your day-to-day tasks and responsibilities on like an average day? Like I can see and sense like the passion you have for what you're doing, and I just want to, like, in your own words, I don't want to be putting words into your mouth, but in your words, like, what has your experience been? Because I feel and sense that passion right now.
Well, it's great that it's coming through. 'Cause I do feel really passionate about it, and I'm excited for where things are going to go. As far as like, I guess my main takeaway from, being a person in this entrepreneur position, it's definitely informs me that I don't have all the answers. And as much as I try to inject, my personal experiences from working at different companies and trying new things, sometimes things don't work, and in spite of all the pieces lining up, sometimes when you try something, it doesn't really resonate. Whether it's like, oh, I didn't get as many like views on this social post as I wanted to. Like, how do I pivot? How do I improve myself? Right. So I think even as like the owner of this company, I'm still constantly learning new things, and I don't think anybody will ever be in the position where, or at least they might say that they know all the answers, but nobody really knows, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, it's that not knowing everything is still exciting, and that like you get into that mode of like, what if, quote unquote. And I think some of my best ideas came from that place, right? And it's like that open door policy of like, well, let's try something. And if it doesn't work, then we try something else. And if it does work, then, that's something that we can iterate on or, repeat as it goes on. I'd say that's like my umbrella learnings of, starting this whole thing. It's, I think something that's coming to mind right now is I was never really put in a position where I've had to manage my time so strictly. So just to give you a roadmap, so when I take orders on my website, I usually stagger them in batches. And so right now, if you go to the website, I'm currently taking pre-orders for batch 5. And each batch has their own estimated delivery date. And so I try to stagger it so that when I get orders in, I'm able to use that money to order the parts necessary. And then there's, of course, like a delivery window of when I'll actually get those components, right? And so I have to meticulously plan out like, okay, I'm gonna have my order window for this long, and then I need to order my parts, and then like the roughly, like how long is it going to take for me to get everything that I need in order to meet whatever the delivery window is that I need to propose to the customer, right? And so that was something very new for me, to try to manage the scheduling in that way. But I think it's working out really well right now. There was a little bit of a hiccup where, there was a number of batches that I unfortunately, and it was out of my control, I kind of had to delay. So I notified the customers after I had talked to some of my suppliers where, there were some critical components that I was actually sourcing from China. And so because of everything that's been going on with the virus, my suppliers said that we actually don't know when we'll be able to ship this to you. And so that was a unique thing to try to address, right? Where I needed to, at that point, research and see if I can source these parts elsewhere. And if so, is that going to affect my bottom line? And how is this going to, you always try to think of it from the consumer's perspective, like how is this going to affect my customers? And so once I got all the pieces together, I eventually found a new supplier, and I had a new delivery date in mind. I think the important thing is obviously to keep an open line of communication with your customers if you're running a business that sells products. And so I drafted up this, really to the point email. And it's like, we appreciate your business. We know that we originally wanted to deliver your Game Boy at this date, but due to these reasons, we weren't able to fulfill that original promise. But we've addressed the issue internally, and we have a solution in place, and the new delivery date is going to be at this time. And so I tried to give myself enough padding so that way that, like, even if something does come up where it's going to push it back a little bit, like, I wanted to try to build in some buffer as well. But I think just about every one of my customers that were part of that delayed order replied to me on email saying, like, totally understand, obviously this is something that's affecting a lot of other people, that are in the game space, technology, and we appreciate the update, and we still remain enthusiastic and can't wait to get this Game Boy. So reassuring that, in spite of this hurdle, because I'm continuing to be open with my customers, that, they're still enthusiastic about it, and it's an honor, to receive that as an individual that's trying to, run a business.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I had mentioned that I take online pre-orders on my website, but a cool little note is that the retro store that kind of started my whole journey into retro, I am actually selling my Game Boys in store at that exact same store.
Wow.
And
Dude.
it's a really unique thing for me at this point, because Chroma Works as a company has not been around for more than a year. So I could have just done online orders for the foreseeable future, but I wanted to see, and this comes with that, like, oh, what if I actually had units that were in physical retail stores? And so I kind of set that up as a challenge for myself, where it's like, okay, let me go around to some of the local stores here and see if there might be an interest in it. And so the proposition then is like, well, how much do I charge to these shops? Because I obviously can't charge them what the MSRP is, right? So and if they want to order like in bulk, what's the pricing structure look like for that? And so that was the first time that I had to dealt with, that kind of a, money, no, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the first time I had to dealt with that particular, like knowing how to price for bulk, and, do I charge the same rate with, all of the retailers, or do I have any room for negotiating in case if they come back to me? So it was all like a new learning experience. And the first shop that I went to was the shop that I mentioned, and it's called Retro Game Camp. I don't think I've mentioned it quite yet, but they're located in Little Tokyo. And, Lisa and I have been there even on their first day of opening. So we know the crew there really well. And so I went in there and I had my Game Boy on me, and I essentially presented it in a way where it's like, this is what I've been up to outside of SquareEnix. And, we've generated, however many dollars at that point in time in online sales. And one thing that I want to try to achieve right now is I would love to, stock these in physical locations. And I think it would be a great opportunity for us to work together in a business sense. And much to my surprise, the owner was really receptive of that. And I think it's because, he knows us, right? So there was definitely a friendship and relationship that helped inform, ultimately the deal that we signed.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great. So we signed that first order, and I went and for the next several weeks built their units,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up delivering the first shipment, and they ended up selling out of every single one in less than 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, much faster than the orders that I was getting online, and so that came to a surprise. Like that came at a surprise for myself and for the store. And so they're like, "We want to place another order like immediately." So I actually have I have one on me right now. But if you actually go into the physical location, you'll see the Chroma Works Game Boy in this packaging, like on the shelf alongside the rest of their inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible to see like in person, because when I delivered that first shipment, I kind of hung around the store just to see like what the reception was going to be like. And
Mm-hmm.
I did my due diligence. I posted on Reddit, I posted on Instagram saying like, "Oh, we just delivered our first shipment of Chroma Works Game Boy Colors to Retro Game Camp. So if you're local to LA, definitely come down and, check them out,
Mm-hmm.
go hands on with them. And we'd be happy if if you would consider this as your next retro console."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like hanging around in the store, and then they're just like, then like a person showed up, a group of people showed up, and like before I knew it, like I was like talking to these people that I'd never met before, but they saw the post, whether it be on Instagram or Reddit, and they're like, "This is actually really cool. There's nobody else that's doing anything like this." And I would hear stories of like, couples that, their first date they ever went on, they both like played Pokemon on their Game Boy, and they like traded with one another. And so it's like stories like that, and being exposed to that side, like from the consumer perspective, it's really gratifying when they ultimately decide like, yes, this is something that I want to support. This is like the product that I've been waiting for. It's like all the things that are being reciprocated to me is like reinforcing the fact that like, okay, what I'm doing matters. And as a creative person, I think the ultimate gift is making something and having it resonate with people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is literally a physical manifestation. It's like a literal product that, like I built by hand, and I'm communicating it, on social, and people are interested, and they remain interested today. And it's getting to that point where it's almost feeling like a little bit beyond my own expectations of now. It's like, okay, I need to maintain this. And then, and one of my goals for this year is I want to actually have a bigger presence during expos and conventions. And so I'm talking to a couple of folks right now to see if we can get Chroma Works as a platform, have it be represented at like Anime Expo or some of these retro gaming conventions that are here in California that I can, obviously attend and socialize with people that are interested in, the same things as I am. So I think that's the next thing for Chroma Works, is continuing to take online orders, continue expanding into different retail stores, and try to expand the presence a little bit with attending expos and conventions.
Nice, man. That dude, I'm gonna say it. That's fucking awesome. What you're doing, dude. That's so awesome. And it's like, and that goes into like why I think it's so important with the preservation of, retro consoles, like, because the memories, like, like you said, with the couple talking about their memories of trading Pokemon, like for a lot of us, for our age, and in even people older than us, there's so many sentimental moments that are tied to that.
the memories of our youth of just like being able to identify with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely it's important, and I think it's why I want to also delve into this question. Since you're into retro gaming like myself and retro consoles, and with your company Chroma Works, like how important do you think it is, like overall, as a gamer and as an entrepreneur and as a consumer, and having the ability to preserve aging gaming hardware? Because it feels like there are two camps of people when it comes to gaming. I feel like there's a camp that's like, we need to preserve and have better components on older hardware. And there's a type that's like, no, let's just emulate it. And I feel like emulation, okay, it's easy to do. Yes, there's some things that aren't preserved through time that we can't still get, but I feel like there's a different experience and perspective of playing on actual physical hardware in the modern day. Like, what is your take on it?
So I am under the belief that not everyone is going to desire the same thing.
Yeah.
And if you look at the space right now, if you want to get into retro games in general, and this even goes beyond what I'm doing with Game Boy Color right now, but if you look at the space, right, you have folks that try to, emulate the titles on hardware that it wasn't originally released on. I think that's the correct phrasing. So, I see people, emulate Game Boy games on like a PSP or a PS Vita. So you have a camp of people that, maybe they just have something laying around, right? They have an old PSP that's probably sitting in their desk drawer or something, and it's like, well, maybe I can get like some fun out of trying to figure this out, or get a little bit more mileage out of something that I currently own, and it's a little to no money investment to get into retro gaming. And then you have, and I know a lot of people tend to draw comparisons, but I don't know if you're familiar with a company called Analog.
Yes.
But they're another player in what I would consider the retro space, in the pursuit of preserving these legacy platforms, and they definitely are on the higher end of like, okay, they make their own hardware, and they tend to similar to Chroma Works, where they release hardware that is tied to a specific platform, right? So like you have a rebuild of what's something that plays just Super Nintendo games. You have something that just plays Sega Genesis games, and it's all in that same pursuit of being able to play original cartridges on hardware that's able to take it much further than the original resolution, right? And so you have companies like that build their own hardware, and they market it to enthusiasts, and there's a lot of similarities, but I think the main difference, obviously, between Analog and myself, or Chroma Works, is while we do build products that play the original cartridges, I think what's even more important for Chroma Works is we want to be able to tap into somebody's memories, like you said, right? And so for some people, like Analog introduced, or they're teasing this Analog Pocket that is going to come out sometime this year, and it's a unique product for them because it's a device that is able to play multiple platforms in one device, right? So it's able to play original Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and then I think even some other non-Game Boy games, right? And it's priced really aggressively. It's like $199, and you get this like kick-ass, handheld that can play all these games. And I think the approach that Chroma Works is taking is we want to, even just beyond being able to play, the original cartridges, is that I think there's still value in the form factor that we remember playing them on. And so you kind of put like the analog pocket on one side, and then you have a Chroma Works Game Boy Color, and the analog is it's like a fully custom product, right? It's like supposed to evoke the feeling of playing on a Game Boy, but it's not exactly the same form factor. Like there's little nuances, right? To ultimately, because they're deciding to support more than one platform, they kind of have to build the controller interface to support all the platforms that they want to. But when you buy, a Chroma Works Game Boy Color, it's like, this is the Game Boy that I remember. It's just rebuilt in a way that has modern features, and it has this slick look that is very contemporary, and it's like minimalistic. What I'm trying to get at is that I think it's a space that is continually, it's growing, and people continue to have interest in it. And I think that there's more than one different consumer type for somebody that's interested in revisiting these classic games. And so there's definitely room for, like those three use cases that I presented, where, you have like the DIY people that, want to try to make something happen for as very little money. You have people that want to buy something that is new and that has a little bit of a convenience factor to it. Some people value that. And then you have something like, the product that we're making, where, if you have a very specific emotional tie with, like the Game Boy Color, or if we decide to introduce like a new product down the line, everyone's going to have different experiences based on how they grew up, and we're trying to go after that. We're trying to, meet that consumer that obviously, maybe they may not even play games anymore. Like I've seen, people that are the same age as us, where it's like, I used to play games, and then I stopped playing for various reasons. And so I think the opportunity to market something like this to that person, I think they're more receptive to it, as opposed to like them going out and buying something like a PS4 or an Xbox One, or in some cases a Nintendo Switch, right? So it's a space that's constantly growing, and there's increased interest in it, even in the little time that I've been exposed to it. And I think there's room for a lot of different companies to come in and meet those different genres of consumers halfway. So
definitely, man, definitely. And it's, I know one company, when I was at E3, so last year was the first time I ever got to go to E3, and very grateful to Performance Design Products for flying me out to LA to go to that event. Fingers crossed that I get to go again this year. I'm not sure yet, but I hope I get to go. But
I hope you do too. Then we could definitely meet up and tear up the town.
exactly. One of the products I got to see last year, and is one that I had been following for a while, was the Polymega, because the idea of an all-in-one
PvP product. Sorry.
No. Polymega. It's a retro modular console that allows you to play, original NES, the PC Engine, all the way up to like the Sega Saturn and I believe the N64.
Okay.
And it's I got to try it last year because I know a lot of other content creators that I know were very doubtful of it. They're like, "Oh, this it doesn't seem like it would actually work." And then when I got to go to E3 and they had they were on the showroom floor, I got to experience it, and I'm like, "Does this really work well with the Sega Saturn?" Because that's the hardest to make modern, you know, rebuilds for. And so like I got to play, Panzer Dragoon Saga. I got to play, King of Fighters 96 and 97, the Saturn versions, and the Marvel versus not Marvel versus Capcom, Street Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, the
Okay.
Japanese version. And I was like, man, this is really nice. And just the reason I'm bringing it up because I'm, to add on to what you were saying about there's different demographics for these retro inspired devices. And it's very true. Like there's so much that I'm very grateful that, as consumers, we have choice. And
Sure.
that's the biggest thing is like having choice, which is, we tie it back to what we were saying at the beginning, like the idea of the console fanboys when it's like, no, you've got choice now. What do you want to play it on? And that's the benefit of now, like when it comes to retro consoles and preserving the older hardware. Now you can still experience it, but what would you like to play it on? Would you like to play it on, the Chroma Works, or would you like to play it on, the Analog NT, or would you like to play it on the Polymega? Like you have choice, preferably Chroma Works, but you have choice.
Shameless.
I had to. But so walking around and rounding about to Square Enix, man. What is it like working for Square Enix? Like, and what's a typical day like for you in that role?
So, fortunately, I have very lean hours in
Mm-hmm.
that I start my day at 10 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and then I typically leave the office around 7. And
Wow.
for anybody that, is familiar with Los Angeles, like traffic can get pretty gnarly
Oh
at
yeah.
certain times of the day. And so, the start of my morning when I'm on the way to the office to start my day at 10, most of the morning traffic is somewhat died down, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time I leave, the 5 o'clock traffic tends to be a little bit on the light side when I go back home.
Mm-hmm.
So I start my day at 10, and the one of the unique things about SquareEnix is that because it's a global establishment, we have offices that are in Japan. We have a European branch that is based out of London. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we have the, US office that's here in Los Angeles. And so my day typically starts with seeing where my team is at over in like the London time zone, because my team is not only based here in our office, but I have folks that are on my team over in the Europe office.
Wow.
And so because of how time zones work, you kind of don't all work at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So my mornings typically are dedicated to catching up,
Mm-hmm.
seeing like, okay, where are things at with like this campaign or this project? Like, what do we need to do to keep it moving?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there anything that, a teammate needs from me that is like an urgent request? So my mornings are to play catch up. And then I have a planner that I keep all of my active tasks
Mm-hmm.
that is visible for the entire team. And so just trying to pick up the pieces to see like what is in urgent need to get done, for that morning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I typically work primarily in Photoshop, being
Mm-hmm.
a designer. So that's like the thing that I absolutely need in
Mm-hmm.
order to accomplish my work. And so I bounce around in Photoshop, and sometimes I'll have to HTML code something just because of
Mm-hmm.
anything that is going to be online, whether it be in the form of a website or, an email newsletter or an online advertisement. Sometimes I have to get down and dirty and code some stuff, which is another unique thing, because I think, at least from talking to some of my other colleagues that I went to school with, some people are strictly creative, some people are strictly programmers. And so I primarily, stay on the creative side, but every once in a while I have to like switch that side of my brain, where it's like, okay, I gotta like stop thinking in the clouds for a minute and like make sure that this thing functionally works. So I have the opportunity of, experiencing both in my job. I have the fortunate opportunity of working with a lot of talented product managers. So when you're dealing with, video game publishers, oftentimes they're going to have a marketing team. And so the marketing team that exists in Square-Enix USA, we primarily handle all of the North American marketing efforts. And that's literally everything from that you can think of. And that's like online advertisements, and like I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk, Lisa, she's over at PAX East. So if there's like, if it's like event season, there's obviously a checklist of things that you have to get ready to, if you're going to have a presence, over in expos and conventions.
Lisa should come on the show.
I think that would be kind of interesting. I told her that I was going to do this while she was over at PAX East, and she was like really stoked that like I'm given the opportunity to kind of voice what my experience is and, promote Chroma Works a little bit. But yeah, I'll definitely, I'll bring that up here and see if that, because her experience is very different from mine, even though we work at the same company. So yeah, I have a fair amount of like me just being at my desk and just cranking away in Photoshop or coding something. And then I have to interface with, people internally to make sure that the thing that we're designing and building is meeting their standards, because they're ultimately the gatekeepers of how each game is perceived, in the marketing. And there's a point person that's in charge of Kingdom Hearts. There's a point person that's like in charge of Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's a point person. Every title that is like on our slate, there's absolutely like a person overseeing the whole thing. And we try to design things that will address to the North American market. And then the ultimate stakeholder, of course, is the development studios and the personnel that are over in either Japan or, we have some games where the studios are in Montreal or over at Crystal Dynamics, for like Tomb Raider and the, newly announced, getting ready to come out later this year, Marvel's Avengers. That like each team kind of has different preferences. So over time, I've had to learn what said preferences are so that my working relationship is fruitful, with everybody. So that's typically what my day-to-day looks like. It's also, of course, like the mountain of emails that come in. And sometimes it's a little, it throws me off whenever I get an email reply that's written in Japanese. If it's something that we're trying to communicate to somebody over in Japan, we have like an internal department that translates those emails. And it's always, throws me off, where it's like, oh yeah, I work for a Japanese company. That's right. Yeah. I will say, there was a moment of which like I couldn't believe that I was in this circumstance, but we were getting ready to launch Kingdom Hearts 3. And as somebody that grew up with that franchise, it was special, for me.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was like, wow, it's like come full circle where I have an opportunity to influence, a lot of the design language and marketing materials for this game that, I would often find myself in like the same email thread as like Nomura-san, the
Yeah.
director. And it's like, how did I get here? Like, I felt like I was like cheating or like I got away with something and, I had to pinch myself where it's like, okay, this is like the real deal where like the dude is like looking at something that I made. And, fortunately, like I've been here long enough and, like I said earlier, being able to look at it from, something from the perspective of a lifelong fan and taking a lot of the influences that I've obtained from previous companies I worked for. Thankfully, the stuff that I'm creating, it's like resonating with, people that I've looked up to for so long. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can really put like you can't really classify that. It still feels like a dream,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if I stay here for another 10 years, I'm going to want something different. But right now it's still very much like I'm on cloud nine and every day is a new challenge, new opportunities to problem solve. And I can't really ask for anything more professionally. So
Awesome, man. It has to be, 'cause I know when you were out here we chatted a little bit, but like it's got to be surreal having your name in the credits of games that you and I both grew up with.
yeah.
Like that's gotta be you're like, hey, I'm in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the new titles, absolutely. And in the case of, I can't say it's like limited to SquareEnix anymore because other
Hmm.
publishers have started doing like HD remasters or re-releases of like legacy games.
Hmm.
Like my name is in the credits of like the latest Final Fantasy VIII, and it's like that's where it literally all started for me to have my name be in the credits of like the latest iteration of something like that.
Hmm.
It's unreal. It's crazy.
That,
Um, it's uh, it's something that I can actually point to, and it's like this is literally like a piece of my story, right? At this particular moment in time.
yeah. That's awesome, man. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask, we're winding down to the last few questions. Definitely want to be respectful of your time, but
Oh, no, great time. So keep
all right. So what is the side of, and I know we already talked about a lot of this already, but main question for this one is like, what is the side of the games industry that fans don't get to see, such as like the hard work that you folks put into your games, like with publishers and companies, and like you were talking about earlier with like the web design aspect and you know translation teams. Like, what is the behind the scoops that you're allowed to talk about? Barring any NDAs or anything like that. Don't want to get anyone in trouble. But what can you
sure.
share?
Um, honestly, like the thing that I can share is my own personal experience.
Hmm.
And, being mindful of the things that I can talk about. Uh,
Hmm.
I think the side that fans don't necessarily know about, or maybe they do, but they don't really think about it when, like, say for example, there's a new game trailer, right?
Hmm.
And it ends up being something that fans don't really like.
Hmm.
And it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe the trailer seemed redundant, right? It's like, oh, there's like no new footage.
Hmm.
Why did Square Enix release this trailer if it's not going to have new footage? Or maybe the trailer is too short, or it's like too long, or it's something that's just not something that they're interested in.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of moving parts to get something, even as like my example for a trailer, right, that doesn't resonate with someone, that piece of content has to go through so many layers, and it's going to vary, depending on what game it is. It has to go through multiple layers of decision making and bureaucracy and politics, and that I don't think consumers really, they're not thinking of it like that when they're consuming something, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of I don't expect people to think in that mindset when they're consuming something, right? It's like you're gonna feel what you're gonna feel based on your personal experiences or your interests, right? And it's kind of on us to recognize if something is working or not. And I will say that in the case of something like Kingdom Hearts, you have Square-Enix in all of its divisions. You have the actual development, the business development studio that makes the game. And then you have the folks over at Disney, and you have folks that, I guess, like, to branch off of Disney, it's like, does it have the approval of Disney USA? Does it have the approval of Disney Japan? Does it have the approval of Square-Enix Japan? Nomura-san is, like, there's a lot of layers depending on what game you're trying to build stuff for. That, the end result is a culmination of a lot of opinions, and that if the content isn't resonating with the fans, you can be assured that, like, we see it all. Like, we might not be able to address everything, but we definitely do, see everything that is being received, or how things are being received. That, if there's an opportunity to take those learnings and apply it to, say, like, the next trailer, like, it's possible that it's gonna pan out that way.
Okay.
And I think one other thing too is that we're essentially trying to market a product that is still being actively developed. And it's similar to marketing movies, right? Where it's like, if you're cutting a trailer for a movie, the movie isn't finished, but you somehow have to convince people that this thing is worth watching, or, in our case, like, this is a game worth playing, and these are the reasons. Sometimes it's challenging trying to find those touch points on products that are still being in development. And thankfully, we're able to create content that, I think, if I look back on a lot of the stuff that we've done, and in this example with game trailers, and we're kind of infamous for being the publisher that, like, shouts about a title that is, like, years away from right? It's like, in the case of Kingdom Hearts 3, it's like, that game was announced 2013, 2012, like, even before I worked at Square, and that was during the PlayStation 4 E3 conference. And then it's like, you never know, like, how long it's going to be until something comes out, but you constantly, like, are in this position of making plans, and if things are going well on the development side, you can proceed with those plans. If things aren't going on schedule, then you have to reevaluate and see, like, okay, what do we need to push back? So it's this constant, like, I guess this, like, constant tug of war feeling of, like, and when I say this, I don't mean this in, like, a negative way, but most things don't go according to plan.
Yeah.
And, like, what are you going to do about the situation to move forward? So those are the two things, I think, that consumers don't necessarily think about when they're, watching a new trailer, or if there's, like, a game that's announced and it's like, oh, why would SquareEnix ever make a game like that? You know, we're trying to build a pretty diverse portfolio of games, and you know, we're trying to make something that might not necessarily be of your interest, right? Like we have different target demographics for each of our games. There's obviously some overlap, most certainly, but and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the consumer having choice, right? It's like some fans, like I don't even need to say anything except like, hey, Final Fantasy VII Remake is happening and it's launching on this date, and like they don't need any other convincing.
Yeah.
They could honestly, you know, there's some people that refuse to watch any of the trailers because they want to like experience the game with no influence, right? They just want to have like a very pure experience of like booting it up for the first time and not having those built expectations that some fans get when they, you know, watch content like trailers. Yeah, that was a little bit ranty, but I think
it's fine.
You know, some like a very small little bit of insight into, you know, what I've personally seen, and I hope that it's informative for people that might be listening to this. Of like, oh yeah, you know, like video games is ultimately a business. I mean, we're in the business of providing fun, but it's still a business regardless. And with that comes a certain structure to how things are made.
Yeah.
So.
It's kind of like one of the things, like I was talking to one of my friends who's the area sales manager for Capcom, Kathy Dongo. We were talking before about how there's like some people that are with the recent, you know, Devil May Cry trilogy that's been re-released on Nintendo Switch.
Sure.
You know, a lot of consumers have, or more so the Nintendo Switch only consumers have been pretty vocal about not being happy that the games are re-releasing at, you know, $20 digitally, or that they're not physically being released. And one of the topics that we were diving into was that, you know, for starters, this is the first time, you know, Devil May Cry has ever been on a Nintendo platform.
Sure.
You know, Capcom doesn't really know if the Nintendo audience would really latch on to it. And so it's like, from a business perspective, okay, you're releasing it at $20, whereas on other platforms it may be cheaper, but at the same time, as a business, you have to make a profit. And a lot of consumers who I don't want to say complain, I guess, that are vocal, voicing their opinions,
Yeah.
they don't understand that aspect of it. Like, yes, we're making video games. Yes, we're trying to work with target consumers, but at the same time, we are a business. We have to make profitable decisions. And it's just, it just sometimes it seems like that just, there's that disconnect where the audience just doesn't get that. They don't understand that, hey, yeah, you can release a game at $10 or $5 or 99 cents, but that doesn't mean that, you know, from a business perspective, that's a smart thing to do, or that's going to be profitable, you know. So
Yeah, as a consumer, I am of the belief that you should absolutely vote with your wallet.
yeah.
And so if you know, like the people that are being very vocal, maybe they have played Devil May Cry before, right? And they have those games in some form on a particular platform. And so they might have one opinion versus somebody that, you know, Joe Schmo that just bought a Nintendo Switch and he's browsing the Nintendo shop and he's trying to find games to buy for it. You might see that, you know, Devil May Cry collection, or even like, I'm excuse my ignorance, but is it all 3 games in a package, or are they sold individually?
They're sold individually, but if you buy Devil May Cry 3, which I think it's $20, if you buy that, then you get like 50% off the other 2 games. So you could theoretically get the entire trilogy for about $40.
Sure.
Versus buying them individually. And the other thing too is with Capcom, with their presence on Nintendo's eShop, is at least 2 times a month, every single month, they're dropping the prices of their legacy titles anywhere from half off to 75% off. So it's like, when I see the complaints, I get it. Again, I'm with you, vote with your wallet. But I also look at the fact that a lot of these titles, given if the Switch isn't your only platform, you can buy them on other platforms for cheaper. But I get that some people, they want that as their primary. But it's like companies realize, like you said before, like we see everything. And literally companies, they see, like, if there's displeasure, they see that. If there's something that's working well, companies see that. So it's voting with your wallet. Companies see that as well. I mean, case in point, EA. So, it's just one of those things that I sometimes I just struggle to understand why there's still this disconnect, especially with a lot of times with the core gaming audience as well.
I think we're in an industry where people are super passionate, and
Yeah.
it's a fortunate thing to be in an industry where, video game fans have a certain level of entitlement because
Mhm.
it means something to a lot of people, right? And
Mhm.
it's, most recently, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker came out, and
Mhm.
that's like another. I mean, this is kind of off topic, but there are definitely parallels to
Go for it.
the. So I've obviously, I think like a lot of people grew up with Star Wars, and
Mhm.
something that was like one of the early things that my dad had shown me as far as
Mhm.
movies go. And so it means something to me based on my personal experience. And to see the state of that franchise in particular, it's interesting looking at it as somebody that, works in marketing, and that, as a person that's, 31 years old,
Mhm.
I'm seeing things through a different lens than maybe I the way that I looked at Star Wars when I was like 10 years old.
Mhm.
Right? And so I think because of the status of Star Wars and how it's like well known, it's a pop culture phenomenon, and the demographic is certainly large for it.
Mhm.
Depending on your personal experience with Star Wars, you're gonna receive each entry differently than another person,
Mhm.
right? You have people that are diehard, like I only like episodes 4, 5, and 6. You have
Mhm.
people that despise the prequels, or you have you know I'm not sure what your history, or if you do have a history with Star Wars, but when the prequels were coming out, I was still a kid. I was like 10
Yeah.
years old, and I felt like those movies were definitely trying to target me as like the demographic.
Yeah.
So I actually don't mind the prequels, just because I was in the right age group of which those movies were trying to target.
I'm
And
I'm I'm right there with you because I grew up with Star Wars too, and when the prequel trilogy came out, I liked them. Which I remember there was a time where if you said you liked the prequel trilogy, that was
yeah,
taboo.
yeah, people were throwing rocks at you, like you're not. And we're seeing that treatment again. It's almost like this cycle now that we've wrapped up, these 3 films from the Disney era of Star Wars.
Mhm.
We have, different camps of people saying different things about each entry. And I think with passion comes, varied uh, levels of how vocal someone can be.
Mhm.
And yeah, in the case of games, if something is overpriced, some people will talk about it. If something doesn't look super polished, someone's going to say something about it. Or if something's taking too long to deliver, like I can go on and on about like all the different criticisms that I've seen, even in my very short time working at SquareEnix. But it's just kind of par for the course. You're going to have like the evangelists that will, buy literally anything with SquareEnix on the box. You're going to have like the core fans that, are interested in certain franchises, but not interested in others. And then you have people that, they hear all these like stories about how complex the Kingdom Hearts storyline is to follow, and they won't even touch it with like a 10-foot pole. I'm not even going near that behemoth. Like, I don't even know where to start. So, yeah, it's par for the course. And if there's any room to convert people into different categories, right? Like if we have the opportunity to talk directly to people that might have an interest in something and eventually convince them that you should give it a try, then I think that ultimately that buying decision is informed by whatever it is that we do to market it, right? Like maybe the price point is where it needs to be for somebody to actually get their foot wet with something. Or, maybe they hear about it from their friends or family, and it's like a word of mouth thing where it's like, I literally just picked up this game. It's the best thing I've ever played. You need to play it right now. I think everyone's, this is very business of me to say, but I think everyone's like consumer journey or user journey is going to be different. And, getting the right game in front of the right people, I think is part of the challenge and what I do every day. And certainly everyone that I work with, that's the challenge. That's the puzzle that we need to try to solve.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree. Winding down to the last few questions. The next one I want to ask you is, for you personally, do you ever get the chance to work with, other content creators or YouTubers? Like I know, for the audience who may not know, the way Aaron and I met was actually through a mutual friend in Adam Korlick. So,
yep.
But have you, like, in your time with Square-Enix, have you ever had the opportunity to work with content creators?
So in my time with Square, there's been one other channel that I actually did an interview on, and we covered topics that span, my professional career at SquareEnix, and then even, at that point, I was getting things started with Chroma Works. That the interview that I was doing for, so the channel is called the Nintendo Nerds, and I would say they're kind of on the in terms of like their audience, they're still up and coming. I was happy to do it because one of my childhood friends growing up had reached out to me saying like, I have this friend that I went to school with, after we had all moved out of Florida, and she went to college with this friend, and she was saying that he's starting up a podcast and a YouTube channel, and they're covering, unique perspectives on video games. And I told him about, your professional career at SquareEnix and your, your endeavors with Chroma Works. I think I think you should reach out to him and see if, there's like an opportunity there. Like, okay. So then, I reached out to him, and it's like, hey, I'm such and such. I'm friends with, this person. And she told me that you're starting this thing. I'd be interested in hearing, like what your ambitions are, and if there's anything that I can do to, help contribute to that goal or that mission. So we did some additional conversations and eventually scheduled an interview, and that's the only other time that I've worked with content creators since I've worked at Square and since I've started Chroma Works. So being interviewed is a very new thing for me, and I'm not in front of the camera or in front of the microphone very often, unless it's like for a business meeting. So,
But you handle it like a boss.
I mean, being able to talk candidly about all this stuff, I mean, I'll talk about it to anyone who's willing to listen. I'm sure Lisa at this point is like sick to death of, like, me like tooting my own horn sometimes. But it's important to, remember where you came from and the things that have led up to this current point in your life. That, there are some moments, and I was actually talking to one of my coworkers about this, and she was kind of feeling down on certain things that were happening. And I was like, take a step back, remember where you were before you started this, and it's gonna make you feel a whole lot better.
Yeah.
Or if it doesn't make you feel better, at least it'll put you in that mindset of like, okay, these are the circumstances. How do I move forward? So it kind of gets you out of being stuck mentally. And so I'm more than happy to, I would love to do something similar like this on like Adam's channel. Maybe there's like a different perspective on the whole thing. But yeah, like this was a very fun opportunity for me to be able to talk, obviously, to you again, because we had a great time when I was on vacation in Hawaii, and now I'm gonna talk to your audience, and hopefully the things that I'm saying, there's that potential of someone being able to take something away from it. And so at the end of the day, if what I'm saying about my personal experience and both my career and my side business, if there's anything that people can take away from it, then that's like all I can really ask for. So
all right. And then I've got one more question about SquareEnix, and the last two questions are going to be about you.
Okay.
So last question about SquareEnix is something that a lot of content creators, once I announced I was going to be interviewing you, reached out to me, and this is a question from them. They're curious about, for like, when it comes, okay, let me read out the question. I don't want to jumble it up.
Okay.
So a question content creators are curious about is, for SquareEnix, does SquareEnix matter the size of the content creators audience when it comes to like working with them to either promote or review or collaborate on their titles? I know that on Twitter, there is I think his name, he goes by Nelstar. He does a lot of the PR for Square, I believe. I'm not too sure, but I'm not sure like what is the process overall, if you're able to answer that.
You mean as far as like us working with content creators on games coverage?
Yes.
So what I can say is the idea of working with content creators is something that SquareEnix America in particular has been trying to tackle, right? And for a while, that team that was working on building relationships with influencers, that team was actually relatively small, and it wasn't until pretty recently that team has started to grow. So the idea of working with content creators is something that is still evolving, at least with our business. And I unfortunately have not seen firsthand at how the selection process is, and I can only assume, this is obviously my own beliefs, and this has like no foundation, right? I don't work on that team, but I can operate under the belief that it's going to vary depending on the title, right? Maybe there's more of an emphasis on like, okay, we want to work with content creators that are their audience is specifically with like JRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the case of something like Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy VII Remake, the size of which their audience is, I think it kind of depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a checks and balances thing where I'm like, okay, so it's also it comes down to budget too, where each department, we kind of have to operate under like this budget, and
Mm-hmm.
for a team that is trying to work with content creators, depending on the individual, your rate is going to vary from one person to another.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I'm sure, like if it comes down to the wire, like it has to fall within the department budget, and it has to, like, the actual content creator has to make sense for the brand.
Mm-hmm.
So like an influencer that, like, if I were to put myself in their shoes, like I would choose like an influencer that has some kind of affinity towards like the Disney brand, maybe kind of knows about Final Fantasy if I want to try to get like a new audience for Kingdom Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
We obviously have like a lot of passionate fans that are like Final Fantasy evangelists, but I think there was and continues to be potential for us to market better to people that have more of a affection for Disney properties.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would go about selecting somebody for that product differently than I would if I were looking for content creators to work on Marvel's Avengers
Mm-hmm.
uh, or like something like the Nier franchise, which is kind of a different animal because that game is rated M. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a point of contention of, who do we know or who can we work with that their demographic skews on the older side,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like we could market this thing and people under the age of 18 might see it, but if retail channels are withholding the law correctly, they won't be able to buy it anyways, right?
Yeah.
So we're always trying to consider all things, and I don't think it's as simple as, did you not choose me because like my audience isn't the appropriate size that you're looking
Yeah.
for?
Yeah. All right. I can work with that.
Yeah.
So, as far
And it
as
comes down
you,
to like relationships too. If you end up like meeting somebody that runs that department for a particular publisher and you are off to the races and it's like, oh, he's like my new friend, and it's like we're all really vibing, that certainly has an effect too. And
yeah.
it kind of goes back to the conversation that you had with Adam, where you never know who's listening, and so
Yeah.
because the industry is comprised of the industry is like it's vast with opportunities, but the people that operate in it, they tend to stick around for a while, and so sometimes the industry feels small at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. So if you have this reputation amongst industry professionals to be a certain way, that could also affect your chances too.
Yeah.
Because you never know who's watching.
Yeah.
Big Brother is always watching, but
All right. No, that's something that I've with many of the content creators that I've worked with, because I do consultations with other content creators, both big and small, and it's one thing that a lot of them tell me I harp on too much, and it's not that I try to harp on it, but when you work with, in the short amount of years that I've worked with the video game industry and the tech industry, it's like you said, it's vast, but it's very small. You want to always put your best foot forward, if you're going to be critical of something, go about it in a very diplomatic way. You can not like something and criticize it in a constructive way, like, hey, could have been better this way, here's some feedback, versus just outright bashing it. And then networking and relationships are very, very key. Like, I have friends in the gaming industry with Capcom, with Bandai Namco, with many other companies, and things that I've seen some content creators do where they, I guess you could say, go off the rails. I'm trying to be as politically correct as possible.
Because they're
And,
passionate about everything.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And it's like, they'll say things or do certain things, and then they're like, oh, why does this company not work with me? Why is this, why are they not sending me this anymore? And I'm like, you have to very much be careful what you say and what you do.
It sounds like when you're dating somebody, it's like,
yes. Yes.
you have that window of making an impression, and depending on the person on the other side, it's gonna be different from somebody else.
Yeah.
Always put your best foot forward, and just know that you're not the only content creator out there, right?
Yeah.
There's other people that are doing this as well, and kind of going back to what I said earlier about the potential selection process. Sometimes that decision will be the result of multiple people.
Yeah.
And even though, like, let's say I was like the person in charge of bringing on content creators for Square-Enix, and you and I, we're friends. I could, recommend you as somebody that, hey, I think, Mekel could be the perfect candidate to create content for this game. My boss, my theoretical boss in this division, could feel differently, right? Like maybe because of where they're at in the hierarchy of the business, like obviously my boss in that scenario would have the final approval, or his opinions will outweigh mine if we have to present that to like another party, right? So it's like an onion, right? As Shrek said, there's many layers. It's not as simple as like, oh hey, yeah, let me get my buddy on covering this stuff, right? Because every publisher is like different in size, and I'll tell you right now, like if I were to ever work with content creators, and I have with Chroma Works, like the layers of approval and decision making is like, okay, how do I personally feel about this person doing a review on our Game Boy, right? It's not like I'm turning to my left or right asking other people, because it's ultimately my decision. But in the context of an organization, it's the collection of multiple decisions that have to be made.
And back talking about you. So I want to ask, man, what are some things that you enjoy doing outside of work that people may not know about? Like, what is what are aside from gaming, like what are some things that you're passionate about that you like to do, something that's like a de-stressor for you?
So outside of video games, which admittedly over time I feel like I'm playing less of than what I used to, but that's because I kind of lived through it at work, and so I try to find things to kind of offset that, and to keep me keep things interesting. Obviously, starting up Chroma Works is like one thing, and that obviously has a lot of synergy with what I'm doing at Square, vice versa. But outside of video games, I still enjoy music very much. I'm an avid collector of vinyl records, both old.
We were talking about that. You're out here.
So that's like another money hole hobby that I find myself in is this pursuit of trying to build a vinyl collection.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually, like, every once in a while, because when you're listening to vinyl, it's not the same as like starting up an album on like Spotify or iTunes or any of these digital services where, like, if you press play, the song is going to play, and if you start it from the beginning of an album, it's going to play through the whole album unless you decide to skip a track or whatever. But with vinyl, you kind of are. I feel like some people, and I find myself included in this, where if I'm gonna start an album on vinyl, like, I kind of want to hear the whole thing, and so you're almost having to find this window of time where it's like, okay, I'm gonna come home tonight, I'm gonna have a very classy, glass of wine, and I'm gonna sit down on the couch and I'm gonna play this album to unwind, right? It's a very different situation to relax yourself as opposed to like, oh, let me just put something on Netflix and it'll just be background noise.
Yeah.
I try to have a little bit more intention, it's like, I want to do this thing and this is what I'm hoping to get out of it. So yeah, I enjoy music and, obviously consuming it in the form of like listening to it on vinyl, because I think there's a certain quality to how it sounds, and just the way that you interface with the thing. It's this very tangible, experience. And I still enjoy going to live concerts. I tend to find myself still listening to a lot of similar music that I did growing up, particularly in like high school and college. And that comes in the form of a lot of like alternative pop punk, things that like the suburban kids would listen to if they want to like cause a ruckus sort of thing.
Dude, that defined our generation though.
Yeah.
That kind of music.
Yeah. Or of course, you have the, I think every band during that generation has to have at least one song about the guy not getting the girl.
Yeah.
And it's like the adolescence mindset of like, oh, I'm never going to be good enough sort of thing. Somehow that kind of music was, it resonated, with me, and I'm sure for a lot of people that are our age during that time, that I'll still go to a concert, from bands from that era, just because I like being surrounded by people that enjoy the same thing. And as somebody that, and this kind of goes into another thing that I enjoy, I love playing music. And so I was in the orchestra band, when I was in grade school, and then I was in marching band during high school. There was always a guitar or a piano around in the house where I always attempted to play it, and then kind of got a little bit more serious about wanting to learn how to play the guitar when I was in college. I don't have a guitar currently because the walls in my apartment are pretty thin. And so not the best environment to have this, electric instrument with an amplifier, and, the whole point is to crank it up and like, really feel the music. So I love there's multiple aspects of music that I enjoy. I enjoy listening to it. I enjoy experiencing it. I enjoy playing it. I'm still a huge fan of Legos, something that I grew up with. And I like to think that, as a kid, being able to play with a toy like a Lego set, for some people, that's really the beginnings of, how someone learns to be creative. And I think the Lego sets that are being sold today are very different than the ones
they
early
are
on, where there's a lot of like licensed franchises where, you know, you'll have like your Lego Star Wars sets, and you'll have like, I mean, we were talking about the Avengers somewhat earlier. There's like, you know, superhero play sets, but, you know, like in the early days, sound like an old man.
Get off my lawn.
You know, you kind of had these like generic themes where it's like, oh, here's like the space exploration set, or here the pirates, you know, set, or like the ninjas like collection. And I think because they weren't tied to any particular movie or TV show, you know, entertainment property, it kind of left this really fun, wide open field for your imagination to kind of run wild. And when you're young and you're playing with something like Legos, you know, oftentimes like you'll break it or something, and it's like, oh no, like I have to either figure out how to rebuild this exactly because I threw away the instruction manual and, you know, the internet wasn't really a thing, or you could, you know, make something yourself. I think that feeling of like, oh, anything goes, like I can build anything that I want. I still find that fascination with Lego today, as I did, you know, when I was younger. So I like building things, obviously, whether it's like a Lego set. I have built many Gunpla or Gundam model kits.
Oh, I love Gunpla.
yeah. So like I'm a huge fan of Gunpla. I've, you know, done my time with tabletop games like Warhammer, and just anything that kind of puts me in a position where I can like make something tangible, or I can like manipulate something, whether it's like if I want to paint something or you know, modify something a certain way. I think that's
There's more.
I mean, I could say like the vanilla, like, oh yeah, I enjoy binge watching, you know, stuff on Netflix or Disney Plus or going to the movies. But you know, I think when it really comes down to it, like I tend to engage with things that I can get something out of. You know, it'll vary depending on what it is that I do in my spare time, but I try to do things that I can either fulfill my like creative desires, or I could like put myself in a position where it's like I might want to learn something. That sounds like a little nerdy. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's many things outside of video games that I enjoy doing, and it sounds like, you know, there's certain things that resonate between the both of us, and
yeah,
I'm sure there's gonna be like that one person who's like, "Fuck yeah, Gunpla!" Or
oh, but no, it's you know, that's one of the things like you were saying at the beginning of, you know, this question, that, you know, as you're getting older, you're playing games less and less because you're immersed in it. And I'm, you know, I'm feeling the same thing. It is not that I have a lack of love for gaming. It's just like, it's part of my profession. And
Right.
so I want to do other things. Like, here's the other things that I do outside of it. Like you and I, like, I also play guitar. You know, I play music, piano. I like to go hiking when I can. Hopefully when my wife's with me, because dude, I don't know. Did you get to do the hike of Cocoa Head while you were out here?
The only hiking we've done is to go from like hotel to restaurant or hotel to you know, point of interest. We didn't get an opportunity to intentionally go on like a hiking trail. Because oh man, so like after I met with Adam and you, I actually came down with the flu.
What?
Yeah, and it was like, for better or for worse, it was like towards the tail end of the trip. But it's like, am I just like gonna get sick every time I like travel like out of state? So that kind of put a damper on what could have potentially been hike plans. But
oh man,
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Hawaii one other time with my dad, and we did do a hiking trail that
Mm-hmm.
I can't recall off the top of my head right now, but
Mm-hmm.
you guys are lucky in that there's a lot of like ideal hiking locations compared to other parts of the world. So maybe next time I go back to Hawaii, we'll try to trail it up.
But definitely, man. Like because Adam was out here twice. So the second time he was out here, he stayed at my house and a pretty big house, 3 bedroom. Well, five. We rent out the lower half, so three bedrooms on the top. So Adam was staying with us, and like literally, in my backyard is Diamond Head. If you want to hike that, it's literally right there, and then Cocoa Head is not that far up the street from there. So like if you ever want to come out here, need a place to stay at our house. So
Yeah, I mean, now that we're one interview in, I think I might take you up on that, man. Appreciate it.
definitely, man. It's like I was telling David earlier, and every time like a lot of my friends in the industry, either working in the video games industry or voice actors or actors, anytime they're like, yeah, I'm coming out to Hawaii, I'm like, hey, you can stay with us, and they
Nice.
usually do.
Well, thankfully, you have a home that can accommodate people in those
Yeah.
situations. As much as I want to be accommodating like that, it'd be kind of a squeeze if it's like, oh, hey, we're coming out for E3 or this convention. It's like I would love to have you guys over, but it's a squeeze for like a 1 bedroom apartment.
No, dude. Trust me, I understand how that is. Like, and then too, E3 season is just chaotic as a
Yeah.
whole. So, but yeah, man. Like, went down to the last question. What advice would you give to the audience here that's either looking to either get into the gaming industry or to work with the industry? Like, what would you like to leave them with?
I think one important thing, and we've kind of touched on this multiple times during
Yeah.
this chat, is if you are truly passionate about trying to get into the games industry,
Hmm.
you'll know your level of passion based on like how often you think about it, how much it drives like certain decisions that you make in your life.
Hmm.
That if you're not achieving it, like if you're not finding yourself successful in trying to get into like a certain publisher or like a development studio, don't give up.
Yeah.
I think the passion that someone can have can eventually outweigh the life circumstance that
Yeah.
they might be presented with, in the present time. Stay involved as you can. If there is an opportunity where you can go to these expos or these conventions where you can surround yourself with like-minded people and there's the potential of networking with somebody that maybe works in your favorite publishing house or development studio, like put yourself out there in like those situations where it's like, okay, so instead of like going out to like the bar, just like a random bar, like maybe try to go to a bar that is like in downtown LA that's like during E3 or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
Just, like, try to put yourself in that physical situation, but also like keeping in check like your keeping a mental check as well, because I think some people say that they want something, but they don't really want it as bad as they think they do.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I mean, like for as an example, when I got the first call from our HR
Mhm.
department that they wanted me to come in for an interview, I had maybe, I don't know, like a week or 2 weeks of a window of until like that was actually going to happen.
Mhm.
And so, as somebody that works in the field of design, I kind of had to have a showcase of like my capabilities, right? And I ended up throwing away my existing portfolio and just like rebuilt it in that
Mhm.
whole time. But I specifically decided to basically redesign SquareEnix websites,
Wow.
right? So trying to like almost like getting yourself like mentally in the space where it's like, I want this job so bad that I'm going to prove to them that I can do it right now. Um,
Mhm.
I think it really did go a long way. And where, when I went to that first interview, I was showing them my portfolio and they were like, oh, you like redid the Kingdom Hearts website, or you redid the, you know, I think at the time it was like FF15.
Mhm.
And so I think like if you are truly passionate about something, it's going to manifest itself in that way where
Mhm.
if it's like consistently, if you're being consumed by the thought, just be patient, don't give up, put yourself in the right mindset, put yourself in the right physical spots if you can, right?
Mhm.
Or if you can't, find a way to do it. Like I was there during the crash of the economy, when I got out of college, and I was kind of living off my parents at the time. So
Mhm.
any money that I made from GameStop, I would put it away. And it's like, okay, like I need to try to get out to, this place to go to this convention or expo or seminar or something, right?
Mhm.
Trying to find ways to, like I said, put myself in the right circumstances to try to
Mhm.
have something happen. Have something happen.
Okay. Okay. All right. And I actually have one final question for you.
Okay. It was like a game show. So that's good. Yeah, we keep
Did
going.
did you have fun?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The next one I'm gonna get a guitar and then we're gonna
Okay.
jam, in this fashion, and it's gonna yeah, I'd love to come back and do this again.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd love to have you back on the show.
yeah. It could be like a triple threat. Like it'll be us and Adam and we'll just like goof off the whole time or something.
Hey, hey, that might happen.
Yeah.
It might happen sooner than you think.
Yeah. I mean if you guys do make it out to E3, definitely like keep you guys company and we'll make it a good time.
Definitely, definitely, man. And again, tell people where they can find you. And also, I'll leave links to everything in the description of the podcast down below.
So just to put it simply, if you visit chroma.works in your address bar, that's the official website of my business, Chroma Works. You can find our Instagram handle, our Facebook profile, and our Twitter profile on the homepage there. Just because there's like a slight variation with each one, because I guess
Hmm.
there have previously been Chroma Works to different degrees. And so I just generally direct people to go to the official website and check out the product, obviously, and you can find my personal profile through there as well. Like I'm not very hard to find. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, definitely give us a check and let us know your thoughts. And uh, it would be interesting if maybe in like a follow up video of some kind, if you're down for it, I would love to send you a unit for review,
Dude,
so that
I'd
you
love to. I would love to review
yeah.
it.
So the only other video review that we've had for our Game Boy is from a YouTuber named Brandon Salt, and
Oh.
he in particular his audience is like they have an affinity for retro handhelds, so the demographic is definitely like within what we're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
So he's the first to do video coverage of the product, but of course, like I would love to send it to more people that are willing to take a look at it, and um, yeah, it has been fun. and I'm sure it'll continue to be fun.
Of course. I mean, like, I'd love to review your product. I am a fan of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance, and I wish Nintendo would bring back the Game Boy branding.
It's got a lot of weight for people, because there's definitely folks that maybe have only ever owned a Game Boy and nothing else.
Yeah.
They sold a lot of them back in the day, and I'm constantly reminded about how much of an impact that device through its many iterations have had through various people that I talk to as I try to market a new version of the Game Boy Color. But yeah, it would be interesting if they bring it back in some form of another. But in the meantime, if you do have nostalgia for the Game Boy Color, definitely give Chroma Works a check out. So
definitely. And audience, I'll be leaving the links for everything in the description below. And with that being said, you can catch this episode of the Kasanova Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and in video format on YouTube and on Twitch. And with that being said, Aaron, it has been a true honor to have you on the show. We need to have this happen again and soon. And then we also need to do one with Adam Korlick, who will probably be back in Hawaii very soon. Anyway.
We're calling out, Adam. We need to make this happen.
Dude, definitely. And I'm shocked he hasn't reviewed your product yet. He needs to do it. Well, he's all over the place. I know that. So
yeah, I mean, we could, obviously, if the opportunity is there, but yeah, I mean, like, I'll leave it with this.
Okay.
So even before I worked at Square, I was actually a huge fan of Adam's videos on YouTube. Mm-hmm. In particular, his love for the Sega Dreamcast. And I think amongst my friends growing up, there was very few people that loved that console as much as I did. And it was fun seeing him express his passion for that console in particular. That in addition to me tinkering with Game Boys, I also mod Dreamcasts as well. And I'd like to think that his videos kind of had an influence on that, where it's like, yeah, I like the Dreamcast as much as Adam. Like, I should revisit these games and, play the ones that I didn't get a chance to play. And of course, that drove me down the rabbit hole of tinkering with that console. So it was surreal the first time that I met him, and it was through an event that he put on with Corey Marshall and some other key members of that were involved with Shenmue. So that was the first time I ever met Adam, and it was very brief, and it just, I guess, like the stars aligned or something, if you want to make it sound romantic. But we just all happened to have been in Hawaii, and of course you live there. So the fact that we were able to connect and have it be like a fireside kind of friendly chat, it was awesome. And now I'm calling him out. It's like, come on, we got to do the trifecta here. So yeah, I'd love to come back. This has been a great deal of fun.
Definitely, man, and we will definitely have you back on the show, man. And with that being said, Aaron and I are signing out. We hope all of you have a great one.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, did you enjoy this episode of the Kasanova Podcast? Well, I'm sure you did. And since you did, and you're wondering where else you can find it on every podcasting outlet. Yes, that includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Launchpad DM by Podcast One, and so much more. And the only thing I ask of you is if you truly enjoyed it, even if you didn't enjoy it, please leave a rating and tell us what you thought of it, what you like, what you didn't like, and everything in between. And also, if you're looking for video formats of this podcast and many more, you'll be able to find them on youtube.com/Mekel Kasanova, as well as on twitch.tv/Mekel Kasanova, and new episodes every single Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, that being said, this is Mekel Kasanova, Hawaii's favorite YouTuber. I am signing out. You guys have a great one.